Well, hello and welcome to the bar for yet another weekly podcast with me, Andrew Fox, and my dear friend who I've just run into, Shana Meyerson, host of the Yoga of War podcast.
What a coincidence seeing you here. I just walked into this bar and there he is, the guy who put Sky into the dive bar. It's Andrew Fox. And that is, of course, Mr. Andrew Fox on Substack and X. Mr. Andrew Fox, what's on your mind today?
So, the big story this week, I mean, pending any chat of a ceasefire, which I will touch on very briefly, the big chat has been the new humanitarian system that's been launched in Gaza. With a fairly rocky start on day one, it has to be said. Um, but it seems to be improving as the days go on, which is good news because if you go on Gazan Telegram groups and look at what they're saying to each other, there's unquestionably people going hungry, which doesn't make any sense to start with, apart from the fact that there are challenges of distributing aid in a war zone. But we know from the UN's own figures that months worth of aid went into Gaza during the last ceasefire. So there's no reason really, apart from those exigencies of distribution, why people are going hungry. And it's become pretty clear why. I mean, we've said all through the war that Hamas was stealing the aid and repurposing it to leverage control over Gaza's civilians and to make sure themselves are well fed and they have means of paying their people when they sell the food. But the process seems to have broken down for Hamas with this new system. So it's definitely a step forward in the right direction. And what we're seeing is um in sequential order, a bunch of food distribution centers are being opened across the south of Gaza, and they're being run by an independent American company. And Gazan civilians go up, they queue. Initially, they get scanned and biometrically scanned to make sure there are no Hamas lurking in the crowd trying to steal food. And then they get the food aid box and away they go. It's been very telling, the reactions to that this week. People accusing it of being a concentration camp, and they've shared pictures of Auschwitz and Jews queued up to go to the death camp. They've compared it to Gazans queuing to get vital life-saving aid from the American contracting company. And it really, I think this has shown a number of things. First of all, it's proven everything we've been saying about Hamas and their warehouses, including the UN warehouse, of course, that was stormed by Gazans and was loaded full of aid that hadn't been distributed. And Hamas killed four Gazans in that storming of the warehouse. But it shows that everything we've been saying about the humanitarian situation is correct. The aid absolutely 100% went in during the war. And the reason people were going hungry is because Hamas were hijacking those aid deliveries. So first of all, it proves that. But secondly, what it shows us is how vital that humanitarian aid supply has been to Hamas's war effort. And it's already been reported that Hamas, in the ceasefire negotiations that are ongoing, have insisted that the UN take back over the humanitarian aid delivery because they know that they can get their hands on it if that happens. But we've seen the messaging coming out. It's been fascinating to watch in some ways because they've been saying, don't go, it's a trap. They're going to round you up and send you off to Jordan or Egypt. There's been a huge information campaign um, by their supporting assets in the Western world, Al Jazeera and the various influencers that they give money to push that propaganda line. And then the crescendo of that, it echoes exactly what happens when the IDF do a really effective offensive. Every time the IDF start causing real hits on Hamas, the war crimes allegations and the crescendo of disinformation goes through the roof. And we've seen that this week, and it's been really telling how much of that has hurt Hamas. But on the ceasefire, Hamas have allegedly accepted it. Israel have allegedly accepted it. Half the live hostages in exchange for many Hamas prisoners in Israel and a partial withdrawal by the IDF. It's another sort of staggering lurch towards peace potentially, but it's on paper it doesn't look like a great deal for Israel. But here's the thing: Hamas have them over a barrel because the only thing that Hamas want from this war is to survive it. And the only thing stopping their complete destruction is the fact that they have Israeli hostages. And so they have no incentive whatsoever to give those hostages up in a ceasefire negotiation. It's an incredibly large amount of clear blue water between the two parties. And my final point today is we've talked about the humanitarian aid and how it's very effective in kind of hurting Hamas in their pockets. It's very good at conceptually separating, as well as physically separating Gaza's people from Hamas, which is what you always try to do in that sort of insurgency situation. I mean, it's not really an insurgency, but they're applying the same principles, and it works quite well in this instance. But the bigger question, I think, is strategically, is it a good idea for Israel to keep doing what they're doing? And I think there is a grey cloud over that question. I think the fact that the war is essentially won, and they're using £2,000 bombs to kill uh, essentially goons rather than Hamas commanders. We're seeing a crescendo in Europe, particularly of criticism of Israel. Even Germany are threatening to withdraw arms sales to Israel. It's really landed very badly, and the optics aren't great. And you do have to ask, is destroying Hamas militarily something that can really be achieved? And actually, since October 2023, I don't think it can. And so Israel has to look at what the best outcome achievable by military force is. And I don't think that decision has been made yet. So operationally, tactically, it's all very good and it makes very good logic and very good sense. Strategically, I'm still to be convinced that it's the right option for Gaza.
Well, um, wherein I could totally see what you're saying. The problem is that if they remove the military force, I don't see how Hamas has any incentive whatsoever to release the rest of the hostages. Israel can't stop this war without accomplishing either of their war goals, which is to say, to get all the hostages home and to get Hamas out of power. We have to also keep in mind that that the world has turned against Israel, of course, and the double standards that have always been so pervasive. And though I understand the calls are getting louder and they're getting more from our allies, we also have to consider the source, and we also have to be a little empathetic to the concept that Israel does need its hostages home and cannot continue to live with genocidal terrorists at its borders. And so I did not hear that there was a ceasefire agreement agreed to. I hadn't been on the news yet this morning, so I'm a little floored to hear that. What does that mean for the territory capture? Are they going to retreat again? Is the
So
IDF
yeah,
going
I
to
mean
retreat?
the details aren't out yet, and it's actually not confirmed there is going to be a ceasefire. These things can
Oh,
all fall
okay.
over, and it's a 60 day is what they're talking about at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean,
It's
look, I mean, I think the issue with Israel's strategic goals is that they are ambitious, potentially beyond what can be achieved militarily, and that's really challenging because you can say you can't live with genocidal terrorists on your borders, but there's not just Hamas in Gaza. There's the Al-Quds brigades, the Al-Qassam is Hamas's.
sure.
There's a variety of, the Salah al-Din brigades. There's like 20 different groups in there, and what Israel really has to grapple with is what comes after Hamas, because there's going to be that vortex of governance. They have to make sure it's filled by someone who, if not friendly to Israel, is at least not utterly malign, and that's really hard to do because if you're going to give any kind of democracy in Gaza where they get to vote in a leadership, they're certainly not going to vote for anyone that's pro-Israeli. So there's there's so many sort of second, third, fourth order issues here with that goal of removing Hamas. And then when it comes to returning the hostages, again, there's no incentive for Hamas to do it. There's no incentive, and that's the really big issue. The only incentive is to give hundreds of prisoners back to the Palestinians, and that's clearly suboptimal for future peace with Israel because we saw what happened with the Sinwar release and where that went. So, you know, Hamas have had Israel in a strategic fork since 7th of October, and they've given some pretty maximalist aims, and I suspect that any resolution to this conflict is going to have to come with some degree of compromise on both of those.
Which means by Israel. But Andrew, you say that you don't feel these goals could be accomplished militarily, but the fact is, fill in that blank and what word it can be accomplished. If there is any way that it can be accomplished, it's certainly not going to be through diplomacy. Israel, if there is no more maximum pressure campaign, I can't see any situation wherein Hamas is going to suddenly say, okay, well, here are your 58 hostages back. They're going to keep some no matter what. And Israel has every right to put on a maximum pressure campaign. Also, we use, and you actually mentioned this before, we use the word Hamas loosely. I don't think that Israel is only fighting Hamas. They are going for those second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth tier terrorists. I think that what worries me the most is it seems like Netanyahu is trying to roll with the Trump plan, wherein it looks to me like Trump has completely forgotten he ever even said it. So I see a scenario wherein Israel does in fact occupy Gaza and is ready to hand it over to Trump to build Mir Gaza, and he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And then Israel winds up with an occupation that honestly they don't want and will not serve them. So it is very complicated. And I do want to just say one thing on the aid is that and I'm just going to say one thing, even though I have a lot of things to say, is that that genocide does not look like feeding your enemies. And in the utter inversion of reality, and calling aid starvation, and even, oh, did I say I was only going to say one thing? Even the fact that they're not cooperating, it's like, if you're really so concerned about starvation, why would you do anything that would potentially stop your starving people from getting the aid that they need?
Yeah, stop the genocide.
Did you just make that up?
No, no, if Mark Zlotchin did, I've got to give him credit for that.
Okay, that's a good one.
It is a
That's a
good,
good
yeah. I
one.
thought I'd save that just to just drop that in there.
That's the
Cool.
best pickup line I've ever heard at a dive bar.
So, what are you going to talk about tonight? Hit me.
Okay, well, I've got a okay, so today actually I'm talking about something that really has no levity at all. It's not funny, not funny. It's none of the things. Today I want to talk about the DC murders of the Israeli embassy staffers Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, which you so beautifully wrote about in your Substack. This may seem like old news, but that's actually exactly why I'm talking about it. I'm talking about them not just because they are humans who suffered a horrific death at the hands of a terrorist on US soil, but because I heard a weekly wrap up of an Israeli news channel last week, and they didn't even mention these cold blooded executions in their top 5 stories of the week. Now, if these two people's murder is scary, the fact that even Israeli media already moved on from the story just days later, to me, is even scarier. Last week, cautiously optimistic Shana made a very rare appearance on the show. This week, it's back to realistic Shana, and shit just got real. The red flags have been flying and flailing for 601 days. And the only thing that's shocking about these murders is that it took this long for them to occur. They were the inevitable outcome of the rabid anti-Semitic mania that has taken over the globe. And I fear this is just the beginning of something much darker and much worse. As the anti-Israel, Jew-hating propagandists of the media and the governments and the diplomats and the NGOs cry their crocodile tears, it's only while muttering out of the side of their mouths, but you did have it coming. The Intifada is now globalized. It comes as no surprise that the jihadis of the left are, for the most part, either celebrating the social justice of it all or denying it even happened. Ho-hum. What else is new? But the fact that a segment of the rabid sheeple who have been deliriously shrieking for Intifada are suddenly claiming these murders don't represent them. What do they think the Intifada is? This is exactly what they have been calling for. And our shameful, cowardly, terrorist coddling world leaders egged on by the anti-Israel media, are every bit to blame for stoking the flames of Jew hatred with their rhetoric and lies. They pretend to care about the Jews as they defend the rabid jihadis in our midst who have been threatening Jewish communities, centers, and students for the last 20 months. They hide behind their pathetic double standards, condoning violence, threats, and intimidation of the Jews in ways they would never in a million years accept against any other group in any other situation, period. Let me make a few things clear. First, Israel is not the Jews. And I'm not saying this to in any way distance myself from Israel. I stand with Israel without apology or equivocation. But to attack random Jews because you claim to have a problem with Israel is just an excuse. Call it whatever you want. It's just Jew hatred. Second, the Muslim Brotherhood's goal of the war from day one was to delegitimize the Jewish state and demonize the Jewish people. Why do you think the so-called pro-Palestinians called for more intifada and more jihad during the ceasefire period instead of more peace? This is not about Gaza, but about a world that in the ultimate act of cowardice has submitted to the evil of radical Islam. This bar talk is getting a little heavy. Third, these cosplay terrorists live for the attention and glory that social media and the media shower on them. It only encourages more terror, exactly like Luigi Mangione. The death penalty should be pursued against this first-degree murderer whose name does not bear repeating. If the US government doesn't start taking strong, decisive actions with concrete and devastating consequences, we will see more and more of these anti-Semitically motivated murders and eventually, I'm afraid, massacres. Fourth and finally, people want to pretend there's nothing special about this hate or that it has anything at all to do with Gaza. This is Jew hatred of historical and historically dangerous proportions. Something must be done before we hit the point of no return, because honestly, it is just inches away. And if you don't think it's your responsibility to speak up because you have no skin in the game, you're wrong. Sorry, but you are just wrong. Anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish problem. It is a human problem. During the BLM frenzy of 2020, not a single white person was lauded for joining the cause without skin in the game. Quite to the contrary, everyone was expected to join in fact was shamed if they didn't put a black square on their profile and march along. Millions of people worldwide protested for BIPOC rights and recognition. The Jews did. The Israelis did. No one was praised for not even having skin in the game. So why are Jews so desperate for an ally and for validation? Because the wheels of genocidal anti-Semitism are turning once again, grinding to dehumanize and ostracize us as if we are no longer a part of the family of men. Listen, every decent human has skin in this game. And anyone who stood up for BLM but hasn't for the Jews has relinquished their humanity. By the way, Andrew, thank you for strongly standing and speaking against Jew hatred, even when you don't have skin in the game.
Well, look, I saw this coming just as you did. It's there's that old kind of lefty saying, isn't there? Like, believe people when they tell you who they are. And that's what people haven't done for the last 20, what was it, 22, 21 months. These people have been, as you say, they've been saying intifada. We know what that means. They've been calling for the destruction of the state of Israel and driving the Jews into the sea. I mean, it's all there. And as an anecdote, a friend of mine was out with his university age offspring and their friends, one of whom was the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign coordinator for their university. And my friend challenged them gently in his own very kind of clever style. And this lad, who was the coordinator of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, finished the conversation by saying, "Well, you're just a Jew lover." The mask comes off so quickly. It comes off so quickly,
Wow.
and that's who these people are. And you know, the anti-Semitism is there to see for all, and now it's been paid out in blood. And I blame nobody but the shooter, and literally everyone who has enabled him to get to that point, because this was the logical endpoint that was always going to happen.
Yeah. I'm just praying that this doesn't become another inflection point because I can't see how it doesn't.
Well, that is an extremely positive and happy message to end on, but I think it is also a call to action for anyone watching this. If you're not Jewish, like me, I'm Roman Catholic. Um, if you're not Jewish, stand up and be counted, because Jews are always the canary in the coal mine. And it doesn't, what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And history shows us that time and time again. So I just urge you to just join me and stand by your Jewish friends, colleagues, and countrymen and women. Cool. Well,
Amen.
I hope you
I
enjoyed that
second that
today.
emotion.
I hope people enjoyed that chat today. Please do like, subscribe, and follow us. And obviously, drop your comments down below, because we love to hear from you and know what you think about what we're saying.
Yeah, and be sure to click the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. You don't want to miss an episode,
You'd be
and it's
crazy
not
to.
always this dark.
Great stuff.
Okay.
Well, until next time, cheers.
L'chaim.